Hey there, it's Silver. This is Starfield. Yeah, it's here. So, Bethesda's newest big adventure. And, well, there's a lot to talk about, but the first thing to get into, I think, I want to talk about the theme, the presentation of the game, because I think it's probably one of its strongest points. And you've probably heard the term NASA punk used in reference to how this game looks, and I think that's actually a relatively good way to put it, but basically this game has a really interesting view of the future. Instead of being like a slick cyberpunk future where everything has a lot of organic lines and is super advanced and very miniaturized, it's got a little bit more of a grounded look at the future where a lot of space exploration is still kind of, well, it's in its earlier days, so a lot of the ships are very bulky and they have very loud thrusters. The engines in this game still like roar and crackle and pop like real life rocket engines still do, and you'll notice that like the energy weapons are sort of like the opposite of Fallout's energy weapons, whereas in something like Fallout, a laser rifle is a very like mass-produced, sleek design that's very slim. It's pretty much entirely plastic, and it's like, you know, it's the kind of thing that's mass-produced for like an entire army of millions of people. But in this game, the laser weapons are a bit bulkier. They are not very mass-produced looking, and they look like they're just a couple of iterations out of the prototype phase. Like the concept of an energy weapon is still relatively new in this world. You'll notice that almost all of the helmets and space suits you can equip are all sort of bulky. They have a lot of exposed hosing and a lot of like metal clasping and stuff, just like real life spacesuits and things. They do not look very sleek. They look a little bit hard to move around in, and everything is a little bit makeshift and not quite so fancy. And to drive home how this isn't too cyberpunk a future, there's actually one city in the game that is more of a cyberpunk setting called Neon, and in this city there are neuroamps, which are your classic cyberpunk modifications, right, augmenting your body. But in this game, instead of being these like surgically implanted things that give you all sorts of superhuman capabilities, they're these kind of bulky chips that have to be put on your face. They're not sleek at all. They're like big lumps of silicone on your face that give you just a little bit of an edge in like conversations and stuff like that. And there is actually an entire plot point about how the first internal neuroamp is being developed. So the first actual surgical modification that is augmenting a person that you can't see on the outside is something that's actually still important in this world because it has only just happened, and there's a lot of controversy about whether or not it should even exist. And you get to sort of be a part of that if you do a specific quest line and help to decide whether or not this is something the public should have. And as just something I wanted to mention, I think it's really neat what they've done with the settlements in this game. So the sort of NASA punk aesthetic is about 90% of the game. Most of the game looks like that. However, the big important settlements each have their own theme and they feel entirely different from the rest of the game, which I think is a cool way to do it. So Neon is a cyberpunk city with everything that entails. The super militarized police force, the corporate culture, the massive amounts of corruption and legalized drug use and all that stuff is all there, including, of course, fittingly neon signs everywhere and a huge tangle of like metal superstructure. But only Neon is like that. You won't find any other cities that look like Neon. And another one is New Atlantis, which is the biggest city that Bethesda's ever made in a game, by the way. It's pretty large, and it has more of the sleek, organic lines of a future that we would see in a more like softer sci-fi setting, or kind of medium sci-fi setting, I guess. Honestly, it reminds me a lot of like a sort of Starfleet Academy looking area. That's sort of what it looks like. So, and again, New Atlantis is the only place in the game that looks like this. Nothing else really compares to how that city looks. Cydonia on Mars is a grungy, disgusting rust bucket that is just like a sort of failing mining colony that is built around a bar, more or less, and it looks, again, completely different from everything else. So this is just a couple of examples, but the point is, all the major sort of human settlements that you'll be visiting in the game, they all have a very different theme to them, and I think it improves visiting these places a lot when they are nothing alike. This is something that Bethesda's done before, to be fair. So, like, say, Bruma, for instance, in Oblivion, was a touch of Skyrim, an otherwise not Skyrim game, and it made that settlement unique. And another one would be Rivet City from Fallout 3, which was an entirely different aesthetic to the rest of the game, including some glimpses into the future of Fallout 4 all the way back then. So this is something that they're familiar with. You know, they've done this before, making certain settlements have very different atmospheres and themes than the rest of the game. It's just that in this game, they've decided to do that with like all of the major settlements. So what about gunplay? Gunplay is very important in a game like this, and honestly, it is sort of like Fallout 4 Plus. It uses a very similar feel to how Fallout 4 worked with its gunplay, but in my opinion, it's a little bit better than that. This is probably the smoothest gunplay that Bethesda's done. It has a pretty good feel to it. The weapons are pretty satisfying to use. They have good sound assets, good animations, fun reloads, and they're just pretty fun to use, and I think that overall, this is definitely an improvement on Fallout 4's gunplay. It is definitely similar, you can tell where the DNA has come from, but I also think that it has done a good job of surpassing Bethesda's previous effort with this sort of thing. One thing to note, by the way, speaking of Fallout 4 being surpassed, one of the biggest complaints I hear about Fallout 4 is the pipe weapons. The fact that there are, like, for the first dozen or more levels of the game, you're seeing almost nothing but pipe weapons, maybe the occasional 10mm pistol or something, but just mostly pipe weapons. Every raider has a pipe weapon, every safe has a pipe weapon. They're everywhere. There's just not enough weapon variety in that game. Well, they've managed to sort of take those complaints to heart in Starfield, because there's a tremendous amount of weapon variety in this game. Even early on, you'll be seeing a lot more than just the same one or two weapons over and over. So that is something that they've definitely improved on. There's a lot of ammo types for this game and a ton of different weapons to find, and with the, classic Bethesda leveled list stuff where some stuff is only going to start appearing once you're a certain level, this does limit the variety at first, but I still find the limited variety of the early game to be far, far more than any of their previous games in terms of how much weapon variety is actually on offer, so I do like that aspect. What about the story? Well, I'm not going to be spoiling anything major in the background or by talking about it, but this is the usual Bethesda fare of the main quest line is okay, kind of forgettable, nothing really special, but a lot of the side questing stuff is way more interesting. And, that's kind of their formula. They've pretty much always done that, and this is no different. So, a lot of people won't remember every single questline in Oblivion, but they will remember the Dark Brotherhood questline or the Thieves Guild questline a lot better, because those are just way more interesting than the main one, and that's the case here for sure. The main questline is okay. It's got some interesting beats to it, but it's nothing that is gonna, blow you out of your seat or anything like that. However, a lot of the side questing stuff is genuinely really fun. Shoutouts to the Ryujin Industries side quest, by the way, which is, I guess you could consider it kind of like this game's version of the Thieves Guild questline, because it involves a lot of sneaking and stealing and hacking and all that stuff. But it has some really interesting beats to it. You meet some characters that are actually really well written, in my opinion, and by the end of it, it goes in some really unexpected directions, and you end up getting some pretty crazy new hardware, if you actually choose to do so, that allows you to do some really neat stuff, including actually control other people's bodies, basically remote controlling people with your brain. So there's some pretty cool stuff there, and that's very much the case for a lot of the side quest content in this game. A lot of the major side quest chains are very interesting and have some really good characters. The Crimson Fleet side quest, you would probably expect that, since they're the pirate faction, that it would be mostly about just indiscriminate murder, and there is some of that, but there's also a lot more than you might think involved in that quest, and it's genuinely really good, and I actually recommend a lot of players try it out because it's that fun. This is the kind of game that gets better the longer you play it, basically is what I'm saying. It'll start out pretty simple and with some not as memorable characters, because you're mostly just doing the early stages of the main quest. But once you start to branch out, you find some settlements, you find some other followers and things, and you start to see that these other side quest lines are there and where you can go and all that. It gets a lot more interesting because you start to get a better grasp for how this world works, and you start to get involved in the later stages of all these much more interesting quest lines, which definitely improves the experience. So this is the kind of game where, even more than with previous Bethesda games, you're encouraged to make your own fun. You need to just choose a direction and go. Just explore and see what you find. Exploration is the key component of this game. I mean, even the main quest line has you joining what's basically an advanced space explorers guild. So everything about the game is about exploration, and that is, I think, how you will find the most fun in this game. Just explore it yourself. Find places to go, find things to do by just going and exploring. Also, by the way, there is space magic. I don't really consider that very much of a spoiler because you get it very early in the main quest, but yeah, you do get some powers, and these are actually kind of fun. From what I can tell, they're basically like an overhauled version of Skyrim's Dragon Shout system. They seem to be using a similar part of the engine to do what they do, but instead of finding walls, you find temples, and the temples will give you new powers. There are quite a few of them, by the way, and as you explore through the game's quest line, you start to get a lot more resistance to finding them. In fact, kind of like how in Skyrim, the further through the main quest you were, the more dragons there were, and the more dragon resistance you would find getting new shouts. In this game, there's also a force, we'll say, that's coming after you for the main quest line, and the farther you are through the quest line, the more of them there are, and the more will show up whenever you try to get new powers. What about followers? Well, that's kind of a mixed bag in my opinion. There are quite a few different followers you can have on your crew to travel with you, but it's going to probably take you a minute to find one that you gel with, because a lot of the ones that you'll start with, the ability to recruit, are sort of the less interesting people of the group. However, you'll eventually start finding a lot more interesting people. So I think that the state of the followers in this game is going to depend on how well you gel with the personalities of the ones that are available, because they are quite different from each other, and there's some really good ones. Like, Barrett is pretty funny, and he's just like a sort of hapless space adventurer that constantly gets in tremendous amounts of trouble and just doesn't care about anything. And then there's people like Sam, who is sort of your drifter type that is a little bit gruff, and is voiced by Elias Tufexis, actually, the guy that voices Adam Jensen in the Deus Ex games. So his voice is always really pleasant to listen to. I like to recruit any characters that he voices in games, and the fact that you can have him as a major follower is a definite plus. He's a pretty cool dude. But you've also got people like Andrasia, who is my favorite. She is like more of a neutral force. You'll find that a lot of the recruitable followers in this game are very good people. Most of them are just like very good, like almost too good sometimes, like they're almost superhumanly good. But Andrasia is a little bit more neutral. She has a history of some piracy and some other really nasty stuff in her early life, and now she's trying to sort of atone for that, so she is often a little bit more pragmatic than the others, and is willing to maybe do some things that other people wouldn't be willing to do. And I think that makes her a more interesting, well-rounded character than some of the other followers, just because it feels like it develops her a lot more. There's a lot to her backstory and a lot to her personality to discover. And when you compare that to some of the other early characters you'll have access to, it just feels like there's much more to them. There's also, of course, all the space stuff, because you are in space and you'll be doing a lot of space travel, so you have a ship. And the ship building is actually really fun, although the PC controls for it are a little bit on the wonk. I feel like there might be a mod on the horizon to make it just a more manageable system, but either way, it's a really fun system. You can buy and sell ships, you can steal them, you can actually dock with ships in space and kill all the crew and take them for yourself if you want. And there's even a targeting system that you can get that allows you to down specific systems of an enemy, like their engines, so that you can actually catch up with them and board them. Although one thing I should note, this is not a space sim, and it's not trying to be. So if you're expecting like Elite Dangerous level space combat, this does not have that, and it's not going to provide that sort of level of quality when it comes to its space combat. The space combat is pretty basic in this game. It looks more complicated than it is, because you do have a cool system that allows you to juggle power between your reactor to different parts of your ship, so you can power up your lasers to make them do more damage, or power up your shields to survive a heavy salvo or whatever. But honestly, it's all kind of in service of a space combat system that is very simple, so don't expect like full-on space sim combat here. Also, doors, by the way, whoever designed the doors in this game went nuts and probably needs a promotion. There's like 5,000 different kinds of doors that you can come across, and they all open in increasingly strange ways. There's like no normal doors in this game. I'm really impressed by just the sheer variety of opening devices that you'll find in this game. And honestly, I kind of like that sort of thing. I enjoy it when games have a weird door that opens differently. So the fact that this game is pretty much like some sort of weird door simulator is kind of nice. They also took the modification system from Fallout 4 and added onto it a little bit, so you can modify your weapons with sights, stocks, different kinds of magazines, different ammo types, lasers, as in like laser sights, although there are lasers that you can use as weapons too, and of course like different barrel types. And yeah, there's a lot of customization you can do to the weapons, which is pretty cool. And there's also suit customization, so you can add different things to any of your spacesuits that you're currently using. So there is a good bit of customization for your character in that respect, and that leads to the skill system, which is a little bit strange. So the first part of it works pretty normally, like a lot of skill systems do. Whenever you get enough experience, you'll level up, and when you level up, you get a skill point. You've got 5 different skill trees that are all tier-based, so you'll have to put a certain amount of points into the first tier to unlock the second tier, and so on all the way down the line. And you just use 1 point to unlock 1 skill. It's pretty expected for how this sort of thing usually works in like an action RPG. However, they decided to add these challenges. So every skill has multiple ranks that increase in power, but in order to get to those ranks, you don't just have to spend skill points, you also have to complete challenges. So when you first unlock a skill, it'll unlock a basic challenge that involves using that skill in some way. So maybe you put a point into lasers because you like to use energy weapons, and putting 1 point into lasers gives you like a 10% energy weapon damage damage increase, but it also gives you a challenge to kill 10 enemies with laser weapons. When you do that, it'll unlock the second tier for purchase, so once you level up again, you can choose to spend another skill point to advance it to its second tier, which will give you a better, like 20% boost to your laser damage, but then it'll make you kill 25 enemies with laser weapons before you can purchase the third tier. All of the tiers work like this, so if you want to, say, increase your lockpicking skill, you have to actually choose the security skill, put a point into it, and then pick a certain number of locks with it before you can put another point into it to be able to pick higher difficulty locks and keep doing this. This is an odd system in my opinion because it puts some of your skills on kind of a slow burn, because some of these are pretty quick, like the whole kill a certain number of enemies with a certain weapon type thing. There's a ton of combat in this game, so that doesn't take long at all. But some things like sprinting a certain distance when you have an almost full inventory, for instance, or jumping a certain number of light years when your ship is laden down with cargo, things like that take a lot longer. So this means some of your skills are on an oddly slow burn, and you can't improve them perhaps as fast as you would like. For me, I kind of like the system because having these challenges gives you some extra stuff to work towards as you're doing your normal exploring stuff, which is fine. It's just that it's kind of weird that some of them are on such a slow burn and will take a lot longer. A lot of people, when they play games like Fallout or other like Bethesda RPGs, they're used to choosing the skills they want and then increasing specifically those really fast, usually especially stuff like lockpicking, because you want to be able to pick the highest level of locks possible as soon as you can. But and the fact that this game doesn't allow you to do that and instead gates things behind not only skill points but also these challenges means that the usual way that a lot of people play Bethesda games and how they develop their character is going to have to be changed a little bit with this entry. Now, I did mention that exploring is key to the game, so how does that actually work? Well, you can actually click on a point on a planet or a moon and land there, like any point. You don't have to go for fast travelable points, you can just click anywhere and it'll be a place to land. Now, of course, the planets themselves are generated, but they do have a lot of stuff on them, so they do tend to be relative wastelands a lot of the times, but there is a lot of content that you will come across. A lot of dungeons for you to delve into or anomalies to scan, and of course every planet and moon also has a list of resources, sometimes flora and fauna if it supports life, and other anomalies to scan, and if you scan all of them you get a large chunk of experience and you get the scan data for that place added to your inventory as an item that you can sell, and it's very much worth doing because they usually sell for several thousand, so they're very valuable actually. Scanning stuff is a good way to level up and a good way to make money. Something that helps to keep the combat more interesting is that gravity is variable in this game. So every place you go, it can have a bit of a different level of gravity. Some of them are really heavy, so you can barely jump. Some of them are super light, so you got moon jumps. And some of them are kind of in between. And you'll find that this affects combat a lot because enemies are actually pretty smart when it comes to using verticality against you. This is actually something I would like to point out as a bit of an improvement from Bethesda's previous AI. They have managed to, well, in games like Fallout, a sort of a sharp slope, something like that could actually like break enemy AI. But in this game, they've actually gotten pretty good at using their jetpacks to move around more vertically so that there's a little bit less of that like artificial stupidity happening. But I will say this is still a Bethesda game, so the AI can still be real weird sometimes, and sometimes just stop fighting you to stare at a wall for half an hour. So yeah, the AI is still not perfect, but I do appreciate that they have done a pretty good job of at least giving them a better like vertical awareness, basically. And you do have a jetpack as well, and you can use these to just jet around the place, especially useful, of course, on areas with low gravity and even no gravity, because you can disable the gravity of a ship before you board it, and you'll actually have to fight the crew off in 0G. You can also find some abandoned space stations in the orbit of different places that have no gravity to them either. So 0G combat is a thing, and it's pretty fun. You have to use your pack to boost around, and also your weapon's recoil will push you back. And if you're using a heavy recoil weapon like a double-barreled shotgun, it will actually slam you against the back wall at high speed, so you have to be careful about that. But it does make the combat more interesting when you have to deal with all this variable gravity stuff. Although this is one point where I'd like to say some of the skills in this game shouldn't be skills, I think. Some of them are odd. Like I mentioned, jetpacks, they're a primary mechanic. Almost everyone has one. They're one of the big sort of headlining features of the exploration is that you have a jetpack, but you can't actually use the jetpack unless you put 1 point in the jump pack skill. I don't know why they chose to do it that way. I think that's kind of weird. The skill has some extra benefits like slowing the fuel drain or increasing the fuel regen rate, but the fact that you have to just put 1 point in it to use them at all just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It feels weird to limit like one of the primary new features that they've been headlining as like, hey, look, you got jetpacks, how cool is that? But you can't actually use it unless you put a skill point in the jump pack skill. It's a little bit weird. But being a Bethesda game, the cracks do eventually start to show, and as much as I've actually enjoyed my time with Starfield, there are some definite problems with it as well. For one, the outpost system is weird. It's like a downgraded version of settlement building from Fallout 4. It's kind of wonky and strange, and it doesn't really work as well as I would like, and it feels very artificially limited, like it could be a lot more. Also, you really desperately need some kind of vehicle in this game. The planets can be very spread out and large, and having to just walk all the time is kind of a pain. So having a vehicle like an ATV or something that you could use, or maybe like a rover, that would be really nice. And the fact that it doesn't have one is kind of a weird omission to me. It seems like such an obvious thing to add. And they've even done similar stuff like that in the past. I mean, they even have the Fallout 4 power armor system that they can use for like equipping cool stuff for you to mess around with. So the fact that they don't use it is kind of unfortunate. But I think the biggest problem with the game is actually in its presentation and stuff. I feel that the game has a bit of a problem finding a personality. This is probably partially due to the comparisons it's going to have to Bethesda's other games, like Fallout and the Elder Scrolls. But the thing about those universes is they have a lot of personality. Now, you could argue that Bethesda doesn't understand Fallout as much as Black Isle did, and that's definitely true, but still, Fallout is Fallout, and it has a specific personality. It isn't like any other post-apocalyptic setting. It's Fallout. It's different. And the same goes with the Elder Scrolls. The Elder Scrolls is not your traditional fantasy setting. It's got a lot of unique stuff going for it, and it feels like the Elder Scrolls. It doesn't feel like anything else. However, Starfield doesn't have that thing, that spark, that makes it feel super unique. It's got a nice aesthetic and some lovely settlements and some fun gunplay, but at the same time it doesn't have that draw that a universe like Fallout or TES has. It's missing something. You know, Bethesda's game design only goes so far, and you need a theme, something to unify all of their mechanics to make them feel unique. And since all their previous games have that, that's sort of what we call the Bethesda formula. Their games have a certain feel to them that no other publisher or developer in the industry has. Whether you like it or not is up to you, but it's something that they specifically have. And this feels very sterile because of it lacks that. Sometimes the game can feel overly sterile. It doesn't have like the dismemberment and gore system of something like Fallout, and it doesn't have crazy dragons and a dude on tons of shrooms writing the lore like the Elder Scrolls. So it's kind of in this middle place where it's just, it's still an interesting setting in my opinion, but it's only interesting in the side quests and stuff like that. Those characters, that bits of writing, that makes it interesting, but aside from those, it's a little bit sterile on its own, I think. So overall, my personal opinion on Starfield is it's a Bethesda game. It's pretty much what I was expecting. It's how all their games work. It is a specific formula that they have, and some people like it and some people don't. And it's kind of going to be up to you whether or not you feel that this particular version of the formula is interesting enough for you to give it a try. I've had a lot of fun with it, and I'm going to continue to play it because I like it so far. But it is definitely the kind of thing that is, you have to dive a little bit farther to find the fun, I think, than you do in something like Skyrim. I think Bethesda's games are very divisive games normally. You know, you almost have no one that's like, they're okay. Either people love them and play them for hundreds to thousands of hours, or people absolutely hate them and can't stand them. And I feel that Starfield is going to be even more so a divisive game than what they normally make because of all this. However, I should also mention, of course, the modability is very good, and there are already some really good mods available. There's, of course, stuff like Star UI, which makes the interface not suck, that I would highly recommend that you use, because otherwise the interface is terrible. There's also some performance fixes and things that might help some people, and some other, like, replacement stuff, you know, the early days of modding for a Bethesda game. And I have a feeling that this game is actually going to be really good in, like, a year or two when a bunch of mods come out for it, and you've got, like, expanded quest lines, and you've fixed some of the bugs, and you've got better outpost building and even more weapon variety. And you know, mods, they just do that for Bethesda games. They really help them out a lot, and this is going to be no different, I feel. So if you want to wait on this game, maybe for a sale, by the time it's on sale there might be some really cool mods available, then I totally understand. But as for me, I've definitely enjoyed my time with it, and I don't regret getting it, but I still see where the cracks are and how some people might not be able to smooth those over. So I'll put the usual link in the description below this video to the Steam store page, so that you can go and check the game out on your own time. Thank you guys very much for watching. Sorry this one was a bit long, but there's a lot to say about this sort of thing. And I'll see you guys next time.